I've got the thumbs up. That means we're live. So yes, very warm welcome from me if you're on the stream already. So my name is Styromanos, and I'm here with Jayaka and Hyril, who I'll get to introduce themselves in a sec. And we're here for this Monday night class. So I'll say a bit more in a sec, but it's the first in a series of four, a sort of thematic series of 4 classes that we're doing on Monday nights. So I'll be saying a bit more about that in a sec, and then Jayaka will give us a full introduction. So it'd be really good to hear from you who's here. So do put your, I like this little bit of a ritual where we get to meet people who are coming into the class. So do type your name, where you're from, in the chat box, and Hyril can shout those out intermittently when you've done that.
Got a hi from Jill in the Barbican.
Hello from Jill in the Barbican. I like the Barbican. I assume that's the Barbican as in the Barbican just round the corner of the Barbican. I sort of quite like walking around these sort of epic sort of like quads of flats there. So we'll kick off in just a moment, and first of all, it'd be good to for you to meet who else is here in the room with us. We're here down in the basement shrine room at the London Buddhist Centre. You may or may not have seen this before. Most of our classes are upstairs, but we've got something happening in person upstairs, so we're starting to do more and more things in person. But we're here down here in the basement shrine room at the London Buddhist Centre. And first, let's meet Hyril, who's our stalwart tech team on a Monday. So this is Hyril. And Jayaka, who you'll see much more of in just a second.
Hello everybody, see you later on.
And as I said, my name's Styromanos. So it looks to me like we've hit 7 o'clock, so I'll without further ado I'll kick us off. So the theme that we're looking at over these next 4 weeks is a series we're talking about as facing the worldly winds. So I won't say very much because Jayaka will sort of introduce this much more fully in the second half. But basically, the worldly winds are it's a very early teaching from the Buddha, in which he talks about the loka vipatis, which we can translate as the worldly winds. So the 8 sort of forces that blow us around. So they're in 4 different pairs. They're sort of pairs of opposites. So we find a lot of our life is sort of fighting between the negative and positive pole in these opposites. So tonight we're going to look at pleasure and pain. So much of our activity is about fighting to get away from pain and towards pleasure. Likewise, we've got praise and blame. Many of our actions will be motivated so that we get praised and we don't get blamed for things. Likewise, that's 4 of them. Then we've got gain and loss. That's natural, isn't it? We don't want to lose what we've got, and we want to get more than what we've got, whatever that may be. And the last pair is fame and infamy, or fame and disgrace. So we want to be known, positively known by others, and we want to not be known negatively by others. So you can sort of see how this is they're pretty comprehensive. I mean, gain and loss can cover a lot, pleasure and pain can cover a lot, and they probably sort of blur into one another at points, but it's a pretty comprehensive model of the different forces of things that we're trying to get towards and things that we're trying to get away from. And the reason I think that's valuable is because it's highlighting that main dynamic of trying to get away from something towards something else, and we're sort of caught, if you like, in this sort of cycle of sort of pushing things away and pulling other things towards us, and we're sort of kept active in that equation. So in a moment we'll start with a meditation. So I'll say a little bit more of that in just a moment. We'll meditate, then I'll introduce Jayaka a bit more fully, and Jayaka will come and he's going to talk tonight about this pair of pleasure and pain. So yes, it's two halves. We'll meditate and then we'll do pleasure and pain. It's not pleasure in the first half and pain in the second half, which was a joke that we were making at dinner. The problem with telling a joke, the problem with telling a joke on YouTube Live is that there's nobody there to laugh, so you have no idea whether it's funny or not. I'll just awkwardly sip my water instead. So so Jayaka will say a bit more about pleasure and pain in the second half, and then we'll have a short break, and then Jayaka and I will come in and we'll have a bit of a conversation about it. Mostly, it'd be really good to hear your responses. So I'd really encourage you to treat this class as something very, very interactive. The more you write your questions into the chat box, the more we'll have to respond in a way that we're responding to what's actually coming, what's actually not landed for you, or what's not clear, or what you really want to hear more about. So just be typing them in as you go as well. Maybe not while we're meditating, but certainly while Jayaka's talking, just be typing questions in, and we can get to them. We can get to them later. Do make the most of that. So yeah, we'll start with a bit of meditation, and we'll do the mindfulness of breathing practice. So some of you may have done this before, some of you may not have done. In a way, a very simple, simple practice with 4 stages in which we're just drawing our awareness to the breath. And the thing that I'd encourage you to sort of bear in mind with this is this dynamic of sort of pushing things away and pulling other things towards us. We'll do that with lots of different things, and you might just see if you notice that dynamic in the meditation. And see if you can just sort of see that as it is. And in doing so, we might get a bit of perspective on it, and might be able to hold a bit more loosely to this dynamic in which we're sort of caught in a fight, basically, away from one thing towards another. See if we can pull ourselves a little bit more out of the fight for 20 minutes or so while we meditate. So taking a moment just to get yourself set up to meditate, and I'll ask either Hiro or Jayaka to dim the lights. So you want to find a comfortable, upright position. And sitting alert, but also letting your weight just be supported by the seat that you're on. You might want something to rest your hands on as well. And just bringing your awareness to the place where you make contact with the seat or the floor. Drawing your awareness down into those sensations. You might just notice where you're holding any tension in the body. So bringing awareness into the face, just notice if you're holding an expression on your face. Allowing your face just to be soft. Letting go of your jaw. And notice how you're holding your shoulders. See if you're holding your shoulders up close to your ears. And see if you can let your shoulder blades just slide down your back. No need to hold them up. You might notice some holding on, some tension that you can't quite let go of. And that's fine, don't try and push it away. Just draw your awareness close to what that feels like. And bring your awareness down into your belly. So often we're sort of squeezing our belly in, sort of clenching it like a fist. Allowing your belly to be soft. And expanding your awareness now to fill your whole body. All the way to your hands and your feet, and the tip of your head. And within that space of awareness, just noticing the movement of the breath. The mindfulness of breathing. Begin with just placing a number as you notice the very end of the out breath. Breathing in, breathing out. 1. In and out. 2. All the way to 10 and then starting again at 1. And now a subtle shift to place the count at the beginning of the in-breath. Becoming interested in the in-breath. If you notice your mind going off, just notice what that feels like in the body and bring your awareness back to the point at which the in-breath starts. Now dropping the counting and just watching the breath through the whole of the body. The full experience of the breath. Seeing if you can just keep stepping out of that pushing, pulling dynamic of your mind to the experience of the breath. last stage. Focusing your attention on the very point at which the breath enters and leaves the body. That small area of sensations, maybe at the tip of your nose or at the back of your throat, where you first feel the breath. Keeping a broad awareness of the body, but with a sharp focus. Now just letting go of any effort that you're making and just sitting in meditation posture, absorbing the meditation. Okay, so opening your eyes again when you're ready. I'll ask the lights to be switched back on. So yes, I'll hand over to Jayaka now. Jayaka strikes me as a really good man to kick us off in this series in terms of how we sort of steadily walk through between these two poles. Jayaka, I've worked with Jayaka for a number of years now, and Jayaka is nothing if not steady. Like he can sort of with one person or with another person in a difficult situation, in a fun situation, he'll just be himself and sort of confidently sort of walk through it all. So I think that I imagine he'll be exemplifying something of that attribute in talking about how we play with these poles of pleasure and pain. So I really welcome Jayaka to take over. Get rid of one of these cushions.
No, I've got to do something. Give me a steer here all on there. So, well, thanks very much, Stereomanus. Nice introduction and a lovely meditation there, helping us kind of arrive and settle for this evening's exploration of the Dharma. It's very, very important that we prepare the mind to hear the Dharma. We need to be more receptive so that the Dharma can go in. Yes, so Stereomanus said if you've got any questions, do pop them in the chat box. And I'm just going to check with Hyrule if the name of the sutta is in the... Hyrule's just going to put the name of the sutta, the Loka Vipatti Sutta, which Stereomanus mentioned earlier, just so you've got a reference for that. So you can look that up. Good website to look at these worldly winds is Access to Insight. So you can look that up and read it through for yourself. So yes, 4 weeks of the worldly winds, 4 pairs. I'm going to be talking about pleasure and pain. So whenever I do anything like this, I like to go back to the source of the inspiration, go back to the Buddha. And interestingly, when I looked at this sutta, it doesn't mention anywhere about wind at all. But we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about it because we always like to use metaphors in the Buddhist tradition. Actually, the Buddha talks about worldly conditions, and he says something like the world spins after the conditions, and the conditions spin after the world. So I think that spinning may be in that early Indian mind. They were thinking that the world was spun by the wind, and particularly the Buddha is talking about these emotional states, these 8 emotional states, turning the world, turning the mind of the unenlightened mind, actually, because that's what he's talking about here. So we're going to go with wind, even though it's not in this particular sutta. So these suttas are often structured in a particular way, and my talk is structured in the same way. So the Buddha often talks about a particular problem, and then he gives us a remedy for that problem. And often the Buddha's talked about as the great physician. So the problem here that he's trying to work out what to do is the problem of suffering, the suffering contained in these 8 worldly winds. And often people would go to the Buddha with a problem, just like you would a doctor. And we've all probably gone to see a doctor, and the doctor says, "Hello, what can I do for you?" And you say, "Oh, these are my symptoms," and the doctor kind of diagnoses something and kind of lets you know what condition you've got, and then you might feel a bit of a relief about that, knowing what condition you've got, because then you can apply a remedy. Well, that's kind of what the Buddha does. So the problem here is suffering. And in the sutta, he talks about what the remedy is, and this is the course of the talk. This is how the talk's going to run in that fashion. So yeah, we'll gradually build up to what the Buddha has to say about how we work with these states of mind. So he says that they're worldly conditions. Worldly here again means the unawakened mind. So for us, it means for all of us that are unawakened will experience these worldly winds, and you may have experienced some of them in your meditation. Certainly I was experiencing them. The pleasure and pain, there's a bit of anxiety and so on. How is this going to go? All those things that swirl around in our mind. So yeah, the Buddha describes these states of mind as well. They're states of mind of the unawakened. And one of the Buddha's approaches in teaching the Dharma, he doesn't actually say much about the goal. He often uses metaphor. He often uses things like the cool cave or the island that can't be overwhelmed by a flood, or he talks about being released from prison or freedom from debt, these things. He hints at what enlightenment is. He mainly focuses on what the unenlightened state is, and I think we can assume from that understanding the unenlightened state, and understanding samsara, as we call it, is enlightenment. And that's where we need to go. And I think that's really important that we get that. So everything around us right now, everything that's available to us right now, can give us access to enlightenment, the states of mind that we experience and so on. So to gain enlightenment, we really need to understand that. So, as Sthiramanna said, there's 4 pairs of opposites, 8 worldly winds, and I'll just remind you of them, just in case you've joined us, and welcome if you have joined us since the meditation. So they are pleasure and pain, which I'll talk about in a minute, fame and infamy, gain and loss, and praise and blame. And they're like these fluctuations. They're just there all the time in the unenlightened mind. They're throwing us around. They're stirring us up. And it's said that if you pursue one, the other one arises. So if you chase after pleasure, pain will arise eventually. And we normally tend to say that you get these in kind of equal amounts. So let's focus more on pleasure and pain now. So, unfortunately, having a human body means that we're subject to pleasure and pain. We can't get out of that. Even the Buddha can't get out of that. It can't get out of the pain of having a body. So often people say, well, isn't the Buddha kind of transcended pain? Well, yes, that's true. That's true on a psychological level, on an emotional level, on a spiritual level. He's completely free. His mind is completely free. But his body still experiences pleasure and pain. And the Buddha often talks about his meditation experience, for instance. He talks about these higher states of meditation, what we call the dhyanas, and how he can move up and down in these dhyanas, and that he can experience bliss. And actually he says that the whole enlightenment experience is a very, very blissful one. So there's intense pleasure there for him. And there's also an experience of pain. So, and this comes down through Sangharakshita. So Sangharakshita founded the Triratna Buddhist order and movement. And he had a particular teacher called Jadish Kashyap. He's an Indian Theravada monk who he spent a few years with in India when he was quite young, and Sangharakshita was quite young. And apparently Jadish Kashyap was very fond of reminding Sangharakshita, or when he was teaching, that the Buddha actually did experience pain in his body. So there are accounts of the Buddha talking about his body being like an old chariot or an old cart. And I don't know if you've been to India, but if you've ridden in some of those rickshaws or seen some of those carts that come past sometimes, you just wonder how all that's, hanging together. So the Buddha describes his body like that. The Buddha lived till quite an old age. He was around about 80 when he died. And there's also an incident where the Buddha's teaching, and his back becomes painful, and he asks Ananda, his cousin, his friend and attendant, to carry on the teaching. So I just want to put that out there first of all, that the Buddha does experience pleasure and pain, although he doesn't experience it the way that we do, and that hopefully that will become clearer as we go on. So we can distinguish between bodily pleasure and pain and emotional pain, and maybe this is where there becomes a bit more of a distinction between the enlightened and the unenlightened. And in the tradition, the Buddha says to us that the emotions arise out of our physical experience, our immediate sense experience, which I find a quite interesting proposition. I've been quite fascinated by that for quite some time. So the Buddha says something like that we experience three kinds of sensation. So there's pleasurable sensation, yes, and there's painful sensation, and there's what we call neutral sensation. So basically, to try and give you an example, from those sense experiences we conceptualize things. So, for instance, it's easier to notice this in children. So children, when they're growing up, they don't know what things are. So they may see a hippopotamus for the first time and they say, "Mummy, what's that?" And Mummy says, "That's a hippopotamus." And the child goes, "Ah, that's a hippopotamus." So there's a concept, yeah? So the child takes that on. But we're doing that all the time with all our sense experience. And so we conceptualize that, and that's just a function of the human mind, that it does that. But then what happens is, if a particular object has a particular pleasurable sensation for us, it could be a mental sensation, it could be a sensation of touch, skin, or sound, sight, then there's a possibility of then that kind of looking at that object can shift into craving, and that's where the difficulty is, that we start to crave things, crave the objects of consciousness. So this kind of conceptualization we call prapancha. So you may have heard this word before, prapancha. So often we talk about prapancha as the mind kind of spreading out and proliferating. When you're meditating and the mind is just kind of spinning off, or when you're not meditating, it's kind of spinning off. And we often talk about it in that kind of way. But prapancha also means just to conceptualize. So the example of the child, that's what children do. They want to know what the object is. They want to conceptualize so that they can communicate around it, or if it gives them pleasure, they can then go after that object, or if it's painful, they can avoid that object. So this is how we kind of develop our understanding. So that's what the mind does. That's what we do. We conceptualize, and then that generates itself into the world that we experience. And pleasure and pain, it's an interesting thing. It can be quite subjective. In a way, it's quite obvious that all of us, if we put our hand in a fire, that will be painful. But then there are other things like, I remember when I never used to like eating olives. They were definitely unpleasant. So it was an unpleasant kind of thing that happened to me if I ever bit into an olive. But that changed later, and now I really like olives. So I don't know what's going on there. So something that was unpleasant has now become pleasant, and that can happen. But there are definite things that are definitely, we say, pleasurable, and definitely things that are unpleasant for us as human beings. So there isn't anything wrong with pleasure and pain, essentially. As I said, it's just a basic human experience. But as I've said, pleasure can shift into craving. That's what we call unsatisfied avarice. So we just pursue the things that we like. And pain shifts into aversion. So an example of pain would be, I get up, I walk over to the door, and I walk into the door and I bang my head and I go, ouch, I've walked into the door. So there's the initial pain there, but then it shifts into aversion, then it shifts into who put that door there? They shouldn't have put that door there, or why didn't somebody open that door? So then I'm shifting into aversion, I'm shifting into blame, I'm shifting into aversion. So maybe you'll recognise that. So this is what we're having to work with from moment to moment, day to day, week to week. These strong propensities to craving and aversion. And if you've seen if you've studied the Wheel of Life, the Tibetan Wheel of Life, you'll know that at the point of on the wheel where we experience craving and aversion, that's where it's said a new kind of life begins, a new samsaric life. It propels us into what we call becoming. And it's almost like we become the pleasure and pain. I'll try and talk about that in a moment. So there are a few ways of working with these, and I'll briefly try and explore these. There's two approaches which are very, very dharmic, and then there's one more of a psychological approach. It's good to use psychology because most people understand psychology, but it definitely fades into the Dharma as well. So first of all, the Buddha recommends that we just try to pay attention to pleasure, pain, actually, and neutral sensations arising in our experience. This isn't easy, but it is possible, and it's a good thing to practice. And we definitely need a kind of a regular meditation to be able to do this. You know, so when you're out and about and you see someone maybe without their COVID-19 mask on, I don't know what your response to that is. Sometimes sometimes I'm empathic. Sometimes I'm a bit, I think you should be wearing a mask or something like that. So that's me kind of shifting into aversion. But what I could do in that moment, and what I do try to do, is I try to just really pay attention to what's arising in my body, because often in those situations I'm just feeling a bit uncomfortable in the body. I'm feeling my body tensing up. And if I can come into that experience, it's more of an integrated experience. I'm not just experiencing the emotions. I'm not just experiencing the aversion. I'm then coming into the physical. I'm feeling grounded. And then I've got a container to hold those reactions, if you like. Very, very useful. And actually, usually what happens is I notice after I've reacted. Yeah. So it's very, very difficult to do it in the moment. It's very, very difficult to pull back once you've moved into craving and aversion. But that's fine. We can work backwards from where we notice we've bitten down. We want to have a pop at somebody, or we want to have a go at somebody, or whatever it is, or we want to buy something that we've seen in an advert. We notice we're doing that, and in the process we can go, hold on a minute, I don't need to do that. This is it creates suffering, and we can just try to relax and pull back and just try to be with our experience. So that's very, very useful, because that starts to undo those very, very strong habits that we have, because these are habits. They're basically strong instinctive habits. So that's one approach. Just paying attention. Just paying attention to your experience. And then, if you like, there's a more of a psychological approach. So what things do we normally get attached to? So I've written a few down here that you might relate to. So shopping. Some people like to shop and spend money. Some people like to overeat, yeah? And some people look at pornography or lots of things on the internet. So, and this is the area of addiction. And maybe we've touched on this in our own lives, perhaps. Some of us seem to have strong propensities to this than others. So what's happening? What's happening when we really desire those? When we really desire these things? Well, it's usually because we want pleasure and because we want to avoid pain. There's usually some kind of pain in our life. I think a bit like Stiramanos was saying about this. How do we work with pain? Well, in another sutta, the Buddha says that we don't have any strategy to work with pain. Or the unenlightened strategy is to just plumb for pleasure, please more pleasure to cover up the pain. So that could be something that's going on with the shopping or the overeating or the pornography or the internet use. Talk about it more psychologically. It could be that we're just trying to get something from that particular activity, that particular habit that it obviously can't give. I mean, I think that's one of Sangharakshita's definitions of being neurotic about a particular object is trying to get something that it can't give you. Therefore, you're in trouble because you're just going to pursue that, and you're going to suffer. So, what might be underneath these habits, these strong habits of addiction? I'm calling them addiction. So when we're in that activity, or when we're just about to do that activity, when we're just about to turn the computer on, or when we're just about to go to the fridge in the middle of the night, or when we're about to use the credit card again, we can pay attention and we can say to ourselves, what is the underlying emotion here? What is really going on with me? What is it do I really need? It may mean that you need more intimacy in your life. You need creative outlets. The Buddhist position is that ultimately that we want to fulfill our potential. I'm sure that's part of it. Being a unenlightened human being is very, very frustrating because we just don't know what to do with it. We've got these lives and we just don't know what to do with them. So it's very, very tricky for us. So we need to try and fill these emotions through. So there's lots of blocked emotions. I'm not just talking about negative emotions, I'm talking about positive emotions as well. We do want to love, we want to nurture. All those things are blocked as well, and we need to find outlets for those. And when we find outlets for those, we find, as if by magic, that some of those addictions, some of those things start to resolve themselves. It's almost as if we don't really need to know much about where they come from. They just begin to resolve themselves. And that's the whole area of Dharma practice, Sangha, spiritual community, and so on. Or we may need to change our lifestyle. We may completely change our life to help us integrate these different emotions. So I've said that we need to feel through these emotions. So there's a danger here, and I think I've seen this danger when I've been talking with other people, or maybe in myself. The danger is with kind of modern psychology is we talk about our feelings, we talk about our emotions, and that there's a danger that we can wallow in those. So while feeling through these emotions, we need to keep the initiative. We need to do things in our life to change our life. Otherwise, we could just get stuck going round and round and round in these same old emotions, same old difficulties. Which leads us on to aversion. Yeah, I was talking a bit about pleasure there. Sort of trying to take pleasure in shopping and so on. But let's talk more about aversion. So, some of us we have stories about the past. We have real experiences of the past that have been painful. There's unresolved emotions there, and they plague us. They tend to plague us. They tend to run our lives. There's lots of stories about this shouldn't have happened or that should have happened, and what happens is, all these things that should or shouldn't have happened, they become part of our identity. So often in people's lives, you get them to tell their life story. There's often one or two things that they really identify with. And yes, they happened. And yes, there was probably some trauma there. But I think they get over-identified with them. And that it's very, very difficult to break out of. And this is the whole area of Buddhism talking about self and being attached to a sense of self. So we need to work out ways of letting these things go, which isn't an easy task. In a way, I've given you some ideas there already. Talking to friends, meditation, Dharma practice, and so on. But we really need to avoid self-pity when we're looking at these areas. And of course, pleasure, it's probably, well, it's not so difficult to be with, but when we say, oh, be present to your pain, well, why would we do that? Why do we want to be with our pain? Of course, there'll be resistance. But unfortunately, the only way to do that is to resolve that is to just take a steady look, to see what's there, to see what we can resolve. So finally, what does the Buddha say in the sutta? So we're coming to the Buddha's remedy, one of the Buddha's remedies. So he says, reflect on the impermanent nature of all these objects that give rise to pleasure and pain. I think it's also good to reflect on the impermanence of the subject, i.e. me being impermanent. So most days I like to reflect on death. Not for very long. Some days it's longer than others, but often it's just before I go out in the morning on my bike and I just think, oh my God, I'm going out on the road. This could be the last time. And I do let that go through my mind. It gives me a sense of appreciation when I enter out into the world. And the Buddha, in one of the stories, is the story of Kisagotami at the end. And I'm referring to death here and how short life is. At the end of this particular sutta, he's looking out across this town and he can see all the butter lamps. It's night time, it's in the middle of the night. He's finished teaching Kisagotami. He looks out across the town and all these butter lamps are flickering away, and one by one they go out and everything goes dark. And the last words of this particular story are, the Buddha says something like the lives of people, they're like butter lamps, they flicker for a moment and they're gone. They flicker for a moment and they're gone. And this is what our lives are like. So when you're on your deathbed, if you don't die suddenly, your life will be like a flicker. You will wonder where on earth it's all gone. So here I'm being emphatic about do not waste your time on with all these negative emotions that pleasure and pain can arise from. So do not waste your time. This reminds me of I was watching a documentary, and it was an American documentary, and this guy had been on death row for 25 years. He'd been facing death. He got days away from his execution, and he proclaiming his innocence all the way through this. 25 years, and then DNA evidence become more available, and then he got released. They found out it was somebody else, and he got released. And someone was interviewing him, and they said, "Aren't you angry? Aren't you angry?" And he said, "I haven't got time to be angry. I've spent 25 years in prison." And it was just that, it just really struck me, that attitude of someone who really wanted to live his life and not dwell on the past and not dwell on negative states of mind. So there, impermanence of ourself. And there's obviously the impermanence of all the objects that arise in the senses. Reflect on those, because they last very, very briefly. In the Diamond Sutra, I think it's the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha says that we should view what is conditioned, and here I'm including the worldly winds, the 8 worldly winds. We should view what is conditioned as a dewdrop. A dewdrop, you watch a dewdrop in the morning, the sun glistens in the dewdrop and it kind of pops, doesn't it? It kind of disappears, it's gone. Water rushing down a mountain. Clouds, or viewing conditioned things as if they were dreams. And really, really important reflection here. I think that when we're dreaming at night and we're so convinced by all those emotions, we're so convinced by all that pleasure and all that pain in the dream, all those strong emotions, it's so convincing, and we wake up and we go, oh, where's all that gone? Where's it all gone? It was just a dream. And that's the kind of thing that we need to bring to our day-to-day experience. I mean, I invite you to reflect on what's happened today. you know, what pleasure and pain have you experienced today? Where is it now? Where is it now? Where's it all gone? It's gone. There's only this moment. So I'll leave it there for now. That's enough probably for us to be getting on with. What we'll do now is we'll have a break. Please put your questions in the chat box. What me and Stu and Manus will do, we'll get together in front of the camera and we'll try to answer some of your questions. We'll do our best to answer your questions. We don't know whether we will be able to, and we'll discuss pleasure and pain a bit further. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes' time.
once or twice.
That's it.
There we go.
We're live.
We're live. You can hear us, I assume, I hope. So thank you very much, Jayaka, for that talk. Sort of very thorough. I really like the way that you go straight back to the to early Buddhism. You sort of strike me that you'd be sort of at home with the early Buddhists. If there's something like sort of straightforward, here's what the teaching is, here's how we respond, and sort of along with stories of hippopotamuses and. So that's so there's a huge amount in there that we could be unpacking. Or it's great to be see that we've got some questions in the chat already. So I'll start pitching some of that. We might have a bit of a conversation about some of that. So we have a question about a couple of questions about sort of pain. A few people sort of asking about. What we do when we notice, maybe first let's start with physical pain. Like somebody was saying that they experience quite sort of extreme pain to do with Crohn's disease, and how does one sort of face something when the pain is really quite in your face or really quite extreme? What would the response be to that?
Well, who's that from? Or maybe you don't need to tell us because they've got a...
Their name is Spirit Sapphire Rainbow of Love.
Okay.
So I'm assuming that's not your real name.
Thanks.
It might be your real name, but yeah. So,
yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, it's very, very difficult if we've actually, those physical kind of ailments. I mean, obviously, we try to do what we can. There's the whole approach of awareness, but obviously, I'm sure medication helps. We need to try and relieve pain, basically, where we can. So you do that with medicines. But in terms of, I mean, there's an order member who's got a very bad back injury, Vajragupta, and she's written a book on pain, actually. And you might, I don't know who's published by. Do you know who's published the book?
Is it Vijayamala you're thinking of?
Oh, sorry.
So is that with or is it, or maybe both? But there's a book called Living Well with Pain and Illness,
right,
which is by Vijayamala.
Okay, maybe I've got the names mixed up. It's very common. But I've not read the book, but I do recommend reading it. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I mean, the position is just try to pay attention to it and not try to have the mind spin off into blame or self-pity and stuff like that. So we need to try to experience the raw experience of it and try to avoid the emotional pain. That's all we can do, really. I think what tends to happen is when we do that, we find that there's actually quite a lot of tension in our body. So if we worry that we've got some kind of condition, some kind of physical condition, and we feel the pain, the rest of the body tends to kind of clench around that and hold it. It's almost like, I know when I get a back injury, sometimes I put my back out and ouch, but all the other muscles seem to contract around it, and that's painful in itself. Do you see what I mean? So what goes on a physical level, I think goes on a psychological level. So we have to try and, I was going to say prise them apart, but gently soften those and see what's there, because we may find we're contributing to that pain through tensing up, and I think that's an interesting area where we can try to relax and try to discover. Yeah, I mean, I know when I've been on retreat and I've been kind of in some kind of physical pain because I've been meditating a long time. Sometimes if I focus on the pain, it actually begins to relax. And actually it's not as painful as what I thought it was. So we need to try to be aware of those two things. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
No, I mean, I think that's really good. It's that, I've sort of noticed that as well. It's like I'm sort of adding to the pain, even not just mentally, even sort of physically by tightening around it. And one thing I find quite interesting is to sort of examine what that experience is actually like. So often pain can become a hippopotamus. It can become a concept that we sort of think that's painful, and then we react against the fact that is painful. Whereas if you go into it and try and get closer to it and try and spot sort of where actually is the pain, I found occasionally, I'm lucky that I don't experience I've never really experienced particularly chronic pain or anything, but when I've sort of had knee pain or something in meditation, if I get really close to it and try and see where actually is that, I can't necessarily find it. And there's something about that thing of not quite finding the pain that that relieves something of the whole experience. It's like the truth is it's not this thing called pain that I'm stuck with. It's something a bit more elusive than that. And that can sort of so just through investigation can sort of change the experience. But, not an easy thing to do and to stay with.
And I think the other thing is that this concept of pain, we get attached to that. I didn't say this in my talks, but we actually get attached to pain as we do to pleasure, to this idea about what you're talking about. So we need to try to check that out. And
that's probably particularly true for perhaps more sort of psychological pain or pain related to... we've got a question about from Jill about what would be a Buddhist view on letting go of a painful past. So often sort of the pain that we sort of experience I probably experience more pain that's kind of psychological, the sort of sense of like, whether that's stress or whether that's somebody said something that I found upsetting or I lost something that I sort of, a breakup or whatever it might be. There's a sort of pain associated with that. How can we let go? How can we let go of that? This is Jill, is it? Yeah, Jill.
Yeah. So Jill, I think if I was with you kind of one-to-one, I'd probably want to explore what you mean by painful past, because often when I talk to people, their past is mixed up with other things as well. Like there is pleasure in the past. There are other good things that happen in the past. So again, we need to try and see how much weight we're giving it. I'm not saying you haven't had a painful past. Of course, I'm not saying that at all. But we need to examine what's actually happened and what's going on, and why is our mind fixing on those particular aspects of our past. And no doubt there's, as I was saying, there's probably some kind of unresolved things that are asking to be resolved. So as I suggested in the talk, there are different ways of doing that. The Buddhist view on it is to try to do what you can, work on it. There are ways of relieving that kind of suffering. What I find talking to people around the centre is that we're all so different. We need different approaches. So you might say different things to different people according to how well you know them. So that needs to be part of the deal. And again, that's why spiritual community is so important, that people know us and that they can talk to us in a particular kind of way. I don't know, you got any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's sort of nothing that springs to mind that would be particularly helpful. I think that it's tough, isn't it? Because it's like it's this horrible blend of like, there probably is something objectively painful.
Absolutely, yeah.
And there's probably a subjective element that we add in. I think that's I think we're all doing that to some degree all of the time, and it's hard to sometimes I used to find this when I started working on the team at the Buddhist Center. My manager was a man called Jayaka, who's a good friend, and every time I was complaining about something at work, he'd always be very good at sort of turning it back onto what I was bringing to the situation and how I was creating that situation, which I could relate to as being sort of like, but there's a problem. I want you to help me fix the problem, and you're putting it back onto me. And it was only once I started, I think it was, but there was a sort of, he was trying to teach me something in that, because I sort of, in order to actually to fix the problem as a whole, I needed to sort of see the degree to which I was adding into it, and to the degree to which I was holding on to it or turning it into something more real than it really was, or once I started to be able to do that a bit more, we were able to fix the objective side of the problem as well. It was just that if you're coming at it too strongly from the subjective side, it's hard to actually deal with what the root problem is.
So I think from that, what I'm hearing is that we need empathy. We need somebody to listen to, but we also need somebody that doesn't collude with our interpretation of things. I think that's important, because it's so easy to find friends that will collude with us, and it doesn't actually move the past on. We do need people to ask questions. Yeah.
To sort of sympathise and say, oh yes, that's
absolutely,
bad,
yeah, it's painful, but and I ask these other things like Jayaka would say, well, what about what are you bringing, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's in a certain sense. I think that's like that's a real kindness that's mixed with the wisdom, in terms of not just how are we going to keep getting on right now in this conversation, but also like how am I actually going to help you move forward and experience ultimately less psychological pain from that as well. Yeah. Maybe one more on pain before we turn it back around and look at pleasure. Sort of follows on from this. Debbie is asking. She said she realised while you were speaking that she identifies herself and defines herself even to a degree with some events that happened a long time ago, and she's wondering if there are any particular practices that might be good to concentrate on, to sort of, in a way, to if we notice that we're identifying with one of these stories, what can we actually do about that? What would be a concrete way of working with that?
Debbie. Hello, Debbie. I think what's helpful is, or to reflect on, is it useful for you to continue to have those stories? How, if they're painful stories, if they're painful things from the past, and to hang on to them is just gonna create more pain for you. So reflection's important, and bringing a sense of kindness. We do a meditation at the centre called the Metta Bhavana, where we develop some kindness for ourselves, and that can help us let go of old hurts. In that particular meditation, there is a stage where we bring people in that we find difficult. Often our difficult experiences, well, they usually relate to other people, what we say other people have done or not done, and sometimes they have done things, but there's our emotional response to that. So, yeah, reflection is important, and just getting in good conditions where. Getting into a community where people appreciate the fact that you want to move away from those things, and that they will help you, because it's actually quite difficult to do these things on your own. At the moment in society, there's quite a strong emphasis on being a victim, for instance. It's very, very strong emphasis on litigation, compensation, all those things. So that, again, that can be encouraged. I'm not saying we're not victims, but we kind of, if we're in that, we need to try and get ourselves out of that and get ourselves around people that won't let us get away with those things. So I think, again, I can just emphasise spiritual community and encouragement from other people that have done those things, that have moved on from those difficult life experiences, and turned over new leaves, and actually moved on from what's happened in the past. Yeah, but I think there are lots of. You could probably talk about this all night, But it's a very, very big area, and as I said, most people have things in their past that they regret, or things that have happened to them that they want to leave behind. But it is possible, definitely is possible. But it is, and it's not an overnight thing. It does take time. Yeah.
Yeah, I could just add something on that. You mentioned sort of this a tendency towards sort of seeing ourselves as a victim or something. It's very tempting, isn't it, to sort of, something's happened and so we turn that into a truth, and we can, in a way, as a sort of favourable identity, and it can, in certain settings, sort of almost do us a favour if we're sort of if we can sort of frame ourselves in that way as a victim, like we've been wronged, and then it's like therefore we deserve something for that. Very understandable kind of dynamic, but it makes me think of I can't remember where it is, but there's a sort of these sort of lists in the Buddhist tradition of various different oppressions of life. There's oppressions of time. There's oppressions of aging. There's oppressions of just being alive, like the act of being human. This is a really, really essential sort of element of Buddhism. It's completely shot through with an experience of pain. It's in the same way as there's pleasure in life. You can't get away from the fact that there will be pain in it. We'll experience that in different ways and to different degrees, and we'll respond in different ways. But it will be there. It's like it's part of life. We will die, and if we live long enough, we'll see lots of other people around us die. We'll have things taken away from us. We'll experience physical pain. We'll be upset. We'll lose things. There's something about that you could, and if your mode is to treat it as like that's a really awful thing and it shouldn't be happening, which is the sort of victim mode in a sense, then it's just that in itself is just it's fighting against reality, and you can't win a fight against reality. So there's something sort of very, I think, in seeing that, in recognizing one's own experience of pain, historical or current. And looking at it from a perspective in which that is just that's part of our experience of our rich and varied experience of life. There's something just sort of poignant and almost beautiful that I find can come through in that. I remember having a walk along the canal immediately after breaking up with someone, and I was really, really upset. I was like more upset than I can remember for quite a long time before, and everything was like completely beautiful. I was just completely blown open by it. Awful, I wouldn't wish it on myself, but something about the experience of walking down the canal was just completely beautiful. It was just, I was somehow more in touch with an aspect of life that I'd probably been blocking out. So let's talk a little bit about pleasure before we end. Quickly. So a couple of interesting points about Brian Romain talks about procrastination, and he's wondering whether this is to do with sort of avoiding future pain. And I might be slightly sort of twisting your question, Brian. Sorry, to fit it in with another one. But then there's Oliver's also talking about can boredom lead to craving, and therefore. Is boredom a type of pain? So this experience of where does that kind of, I can just recognise that procrastinating, bit bored, bit unsatisfied, and that's where I can certainly identify with that experience, that sort of craving for something more, whether it's on YouTube, you finished watching the class tonight, see if you can try and avoid doing this, and suddenly there's another video there, and watch a little bit of that, and there's another one, and there's this sort of unsatisfied sense. But I guess what is boredom? Is boredom painful? Does boredom have to be painful?
Well, it makes me think of, I talked about those three types of sensation: pleasure, pain, and neutral sensation. Sometimes people say, boredom arises out of neutral kind of experience, like experience that is neither pleasant or painful. So there you are, nothing much happening. You're not stimulated by doing anything, and there you are. You don't want to do anything, or you may procrastinate. So I think boredom can set in if we're not being stimulated in any kind of way with pleasure or pain. But that can be a fruitful experience. Again, it's one of those experiences that you can try to stay with and just explore and feel that in your body. And my experience of that, so probably my main experiences of that is when I'm on solitary retreat. Particularly the first part of solitary retreat, I'm on my own, I'm used to being stimulated and I'm doing all these things and blah, blah, I'm talking to people, and then suddenly I'm meditating more, there's all this space and a bit of boredom sets in. So for me, that can be quite fruitful if I'm willing to stay with that. I can start to discover new levels of, or more aesthetic kind of pleasure, a bit like what you were talking about with the breakups, totally different kind of situation. But so I can shift into more aesthetic kind of experience, actually. Start to notice things. If I can remember to take the time to look at things, it can become a pleasurable experience. But again, it's just a human experience. And well, you can say, as long as I think you're aware that you're bored, then you can take action. You can decide to stay with that, as I've just said, or you can decide to do something else. But nothing wrong in itself. I mean, but procrastination. Hello, Brian. I know Brian. Procrastination. For me, it's usually some kind of resistance, and there's some kind of aversion there. That there's something I don't want to do because I don't know what it's going to arise out of that. Does that make sense? So I kind of hold back a bit. Yes, I think there's slightly different things.
Yeah, I can recognise that. That sort of, it's like I know that if I just stop and look at my experience for a moment, I'll see that it's actually quite often underneath procrastination is some pain, not just necessarily future pain, but like right there in the moment, and I'm just trying to sort of avoid that by by bouncing around. And I can sort of know that and still carry on, but sometimes it takes a bit of courage to be like, no, I'm just going to stop, close down my computer screen, and just experience that slightly sort of feeling. But then there's a chance for that to sort of move along after that, because I'm no longer sort of digging the hole any deeper. So that's probably all that we've got time for, I'm afraid, in terms of questions. So sorry if we've not managed to get to any of your questions. I see that there's been more than we've been able to get to, but really great to hear what's of interest to you, and I hope that some of that's been helpful. So I'd just like to say, before we sort of round the class off, I'd just like to just really encourage you to give financially to the London Buddhist Centre. In a way, we could think of it in terms of like, if you've got something from the class, then you could sort of give us some money in response. But I think there's a bit of a different way of that, because I mean, we're purposefully wanting to give these classes for free so that anyone can join in. We do the same for the vast majority of our classes when the Buddhist Centre is open as normal. Actually, I was thinking, what is the London Buddhist Centre at the moment? Sort of, I work here, and so I'm around here a lot, and we're sort of on different computer screens at different times. We're starting to get retreats up and running again soon. There's lots sort of going on behind the scenes, and we're reaching lots of different people in different ways. But it's such a different beast to what it normally is. I'm used to the London Buddhist Centre being sort of chock full of people and together, and I'm really, really hoping that we can get back to something of that before too long. And there's something really beneficial that's come through this period where we've started to reach people who wouldn't otherwise have been able to engage with us. So I'm really hoping that we can come out the other side of this situation that we're in, again with that sort of buzzing atmosphere that we can get here and on retreat, and with a whole new broader sort of sangha of people who've got involved with us across this time. So I'd encourage you, rather than just thinking of it in terms of giving because you got something from this particular class, more think of joining in with the project and trying to make that possible. Financially, it's a difficult time for us. We're not in dire straits, but it's difficult, and we're losing money quite rapidly. So if it's the London Buddhist Centre itself is a project that you find to be valuable and you'd like to see continue to flourish into the future, as I certainly would, then I'd really encourage you to give what you can. If you can give monthly, all the better. So we can predict and financially plan. So I'll ask Hyrule to post a link in the chat so that you can follow through on that. And just to end, we'll just recite the transference of merit and self-surrender, so that we can take the benefit that we've for us here in doing this class, but also for all of you at home for joining in. Any benefit that you might have gained from tonight, to dedicate that for more than just yourself, so that the benefits can be more widely felt. So I'll do it in call and response, and I'll ask Jayaka and Hyrule to be the response, and you can follow along after me. Once I've found it. There we go. Transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained.
May the merit gained.
In my acting thus.
In my acting thus.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences.
My personality throughout my existences.
My possessions.
My possessions.
And my merit in all three ways.
And my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself.
I give up without regard to myself.
For the benefit of all beings.
For the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Are serviceable in many ways.
Are serviceable in many ways.
To the infinite number of beings.
To the infinite number of beings.
Inhabiting limitless space.
Inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become.
So may I become.
That which maintains all beings.
That which maintains all beings.
Situated throughout space.
Situated throughout space.
So long as all have not attained.
So long as all have not attained.
To peace.
To peace.